a little bit of a history on development of fire codes, steps for a department to form a fire safety bureau, the code adoption process, building community support for solution to a problem, ordinance adoption, the 5 E's to fire prevention program, any impacts that enforcement fines, code fees have, key performance indicators. And also maintaining good relationships within the community, attitude, managing code enforcement in the field, fire ground risks and pre-incident planning, public protection classifications, and then analyzing fire prevention program. So a lot of times if we need to implement a new program, we have to justify that somehow, and that's usually with data. Why do we need it? We need to back that up. A lot of departments do not have a full fire prevention bureau, so if that's something that they wanted to put in place, they need to show why it's needed and how it can help the problem. One of the goals is affecting behavior changes and changes in attitude, and we need to sell that philosophy that the easiest fire to fight is one that doesn't happen. Less fires, smaller fires, it's less injuries, less property damage. So with fire codes, there is not one national fire code for the U.S. They kind of started as local documents, cities coming up with their own fire code. Some states started to adopt fire codes or mini-maxi codes, basically where you can't enforce or make somebody do anything less or more than what's written in the code. And they're typically based on past incidents that have happened, past fires, and that still happens to this day. It doesn't seem like it, but it was 20 years ago. I think '03 was the Station nightclub fire, and there was several code changes that came out of that. But there was sprinkler requirements. They changed it to occupant loads over 100 needed a sprinkler system. Kentucky's amended that to 300. We'd like it to be 100, but they require crowd managers now. So like every 250 people, your occupant load, you have to have a trained crowd manager that's basically trained on what to do in an emergency, doing pre-event checklists, making sure their fire protection systems are up and working and exits are clear and that sort of thing. But an incident happens, they might take what happened in that incident and use it to change the code. If a department doesn't already have one and they need to create a bureau or a division for fire prevention, they need to assign responsibilities, whether they're going to have plan review, public education, or just code enforcement. Some smaller departments, it might not even be an additional chief officer, and then naming it. We've seen some departments that have moved towards a community risk reduction section, so they're not, I guess, put in a box of just fire safety. A little bit about ours. The Bureau was formed in 1920. And initially, they were led by captains until I think it was about the 40s. And there was a major in charge of the Bureau. And then now we have a fire marshal who's a lieutenant colonel. Which has kind of morphed over time. In this book, they refer to basically the fire inspector role as a fire safety specialist. So they rely on the adopted fire code. That's what gives them the legal authority to go in and inspect and mitigate whatever they find. Ensuring public safety. We usually refer to the fire code as a maintenance code. So a building's built under the IBC for Kentucky. It's the International Building Code. Kentucky Building Code adopts that with some modifications. So that's a new construction code. Once it's built and they get a CO, certificate of occupancy, then we're enforcing the fire code, which is maintaining what's there. They're developed through a consensus process and updated through that process. NFPA codes, even ICC, they have technical committees that meet. So like if it's a code on fireworks, they have people from the fireworks industry that are on that panel, along with fire departments and other people that have some sort of stake in that code. One of the benefits of a nationally adopted code over a local code is it has the weight and experience of that organization. It's a legally vetted document. Two of the main ones in the U.S. are the ICC codes and NFPA. And also, when they're updating a code, they'll take in public comments. So it could be a fire marshal from some city that says, "Hey, I think this is wrong," or it could be as simple as the spelling or something, or how it's worded. And they'll submit comments. Then the technical committee goes back and reads through all those comments and decides whether they're going to implement that or make changes. State code adoption. So a state can basically adopt a fire code, which Kentucky has done through the Kentucky Standards of Safety, and they've adopted NFPA 1. So the local adoption, we have Ordinance Chapter 94, which pulls in the Kentucky Standards of Safety, and in turn NFPA 1. So that's what defines what code we go out of. This goes a little into the 5 E's of a fire prevention program. So engineering, a lot of this is the new construction process, and making sure that a building, when it's built, has all the systems in place that we're worried about. Fire protection systems, water supply, egress. And it could be an engineering solution to a problem too. So we were talking about cooking incidents at Dosker. We started out with the public education side, and we're trying to pull a little bit of engineering into that problem. So UL, probably 2018, put out new requirements for the electric coil type stoves. They have to have, I think GE's version of it's called SensiTemp. It's a little button in the middle of that coil that has to have a fairly heavy pan on it, but it limits the temperature of that burner, and it's supposed to prevent, so they've done lab tests and everything showing that it will prevent food from catching on fire in that pan. So stoves require that now. If you go out to any store and buy a coil type stove, it has those type of burners. So we asked Housing Authority, okay, what type of stoves do you have in stock? What are you replacing stoves with? They have the old type. So our push is to get them to replace that stock with the newer type stoves, And if they have repeat offenders, they were making multiple runs to the same unit for food on stove, just go ahead and replace that. It's gonna take a while because they don't have the money to just say, we're gonna replace all of them right now. So that's just a little bit about how we can pull an engineering control into that to fix a problem. So now it's kind of a twofold solution, the education side and engineering side, to try and reduce that.
It would be a little bit easier, I mean, I guess on anything new construction, it'd be easier because they're buying,
Yeah.
they have to buy them all anyway.
Yeah.
But what about, just going back a little bit, what you said about new construction and new guidelines, because obviously some people on some things are grandfathered in. What about like, use Salvation Army, 911 South Brook as an example? That used to be a high school.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a completely different group of people that are there. Do there have to be sweeping changes because it's getting rezoned or reclassified as a homeless shelter instead of a high school? Because a lot of the problems we were having is like elevator access and stuff, and their elevators weren't designed for the stretchers for large people that we had, the bariatric stretchers.
Yeah.
I mean, carrying a lot of people down, everything. You know, people that are high schoolers aren't typically huge and overweight and broke down. So when you talk about egress and stuff like that, it's just kind of like make it work, or was there a lot of things you have to go through when it changes from one thing to another?
Everybody does what they're supposed to and goes to the building department to change. Typically, if you have, say it's a single family and we find it's being used as a boarding house, that's a clear change of use. They should go to the building department for any change like that and get a change of occupancy. And that might require, they might have to put a sprinkler system in. So, like with that case, that's technically a change of occupancy. Probably, if they didn't, they probably should have gone to the building department, which if something's going through a major renovation or an upgrade, it ends up having to meet the current code. So like, if the building is in use as what it was initially approved as, you can't go back and say, hey, you need a sprinkler system because the new code says that.
Once it's already
Maintaining it as what it was approved as under that building code, that past building code, we can't tell them to do anything unless they say, hey, we're gutting this building, it's changing to a nightclub. Now the new code comes into effect and we can bring them up to that. So if it's a clear change of use and there are things that work right in there, it might be that they didn't go through change of occupancy, but that's where it gets tough too, because then places in operation like that and you just say, hey, well, you were supposed to do this, and then they go down to the building department and they tell them, well, you need to put in a full sprinkler system or whatever it is, and it's an insane amount of money, especially when it's a retrofit. And that's why we try and catch a lot of that stuff while they're doing it. It's easier to get it fixed in that phase. Education side, in addition to pub ed programs, we're constantly trying to educate people on why they're being cited for a certain violation, why the code says what it says. You need to take that lock off that door. Instead of just saying you need to take that lock off that door, we're trying to explain why that code is there. Trying to ensure that occupants can get out. Enforcement, basically identifying the hazards on an inspection, giving them a plan to correct it or time to correct it. We operate on a 30, 60, 90 day process where our letters kind of escalate, and we're looking for that owner or that occupant to make progress on what we've cited. If they're not making progress or they do not comply with that, we can take out an administrative warrant and take them to court.
Even in a private dwelling?
Hmm.
Even in a private dwelling?
So we don't have jurisdiction over single-family dwellings or duplexes. Code enforcement will. So if we have an issue with a single family or a duplex, we can refer that to code enforcement, and they do eventually get to the court process.
What if they converted it to like a single family dwelling converted to a boarding house? Then can you guys?
You cite them for that, yes. So we'll give them a violation to basically, you have to go to the building department and pull permits. And then that's what we're following up on. Have they pulled permits to convert that to a boarding house? It's basically a discontinued use violation, saying you cannot use this building as a boarding house. It was only approved as a single family.
So our avenue is an inspection request, correct?
Uh-huh. And then we'll send an inspector out, basically verify that, and cite the owner.
It's not weird to talk to individuals because if somebody's in an apartment, that's their place of residence.
Yes.
And you can have the metro ordinance that says no smoking in buildings, but they're setting off their smoke detector all the time, and you go to them and say, man, you gotta stop laying on the bed here smoking under it. You can't smoke in here anyway, and it's kind of like, this is my house, I'll do whatever I want. But they live in Dosker Manor. But they see that as their, or they don't want you even coming in there, like if they burn something, no, it's good, it's good. It's like, we need to come in there and look, no, you're not coming in here. They're like, well, in this commercial, it comes in as a commercial fire because it's a commercial structure because it's apartments, and some of it is city money funded.
Well, that's the thing with
They
that
still see it as
building.
their residents, like,
Yeah.
I can tell you can't come, we need to evacuate, you can't come to do that in my own house.
Yeah, that's, with that type of building, it's a multifamily. Even if you think about a condo building where they're all attached in one, those units are individually owned, but it's still, in our eyes, a multifamily dwelling because it's not just affecting you when your place is on fire, it's affecting others. A good example of a code where it's kind of differentiated by that is grills. So we can't control if somebody has a grill right up against their house on their deck. We can on apartment buildings. They can't have them on balconies and they can't have them within 10 feet of the building, used or stored. So we can cite that building for a grill at an apartment complex, but we can't with a single family. With a single family, if the grill catches your house on fire, you're affecting your home, whoever's inside your home. But a multifamily, that's affecting more than just your unit.
So how does that apply to open burns? What are legal burns? If somebody's doing it on their own property, is that?
That's regulated by air pollution control,
Okay.
but they'll go out and talk to somebody, and usually on a second visit, they'll cite them and fine them.
Was there like a form that they used to send out, like what's legal and not legal? Like fire prevention made a form.
We have some. We have some packets that APCD gave us, and it gives if it's a recreational fire, it's 3x3x3, and either they say like a built approved fire pit or a manufactured one that you can buy at the store. And it's supposed to be seasoned dry firewood, not sticks taken out of the yard. Yeah, yard debris, construction debris. No burn barrels. Anything beyond that, I think the packet that they gave is pretty clear, like what's required, and I think we've got some in stock if anybody wanted some, and they used to have it on their website too. You could just print the quick page out, but we can get air pollution control involved. If you are having a problem with like one residence or something like that, we can refer that to APCD and they'll send one of their people out and they usually talk to them, and then if they get called out again, they might fine them. Emergency response, better preparation. So we're talking about pre-plan information, target hazards. Our inspectors are trying to update that file as much as they can with contact information, building floor plans, that sort of thing. And now we're putting all the target hazards on active 911, dangerous locations, Knox boxes. We started putting solar panel locations. So every so often we'll get a list from the building department of permits that were approved for solar panels. Doesn't give you a lot of information, but just an awareness of where they're at. And they're everywhere because of the incentives that have been out there. It's not just one district that's got them, they're everywhere. But just trying to make some of that information a little bit more accessible. And we know you're probably not going to pull up a target hazard while you're on the way to a fire, but if it's a 2 alarm or something, you might use it at the command post and pull up floor plans and where the utility's at and that sort of thing. But with the dangerous location, at least you got a quick visual that, hey, there's something there, and you can click it and it's either clear boarding or there's holes in the floor or whatever it is. Hazmat properties, they'll show up there on I think a yellow flag. Andy Smith, our hazmat specialist, he has really good floor plans, and we attach all of those in there. Those properties get done every year, so he's constantly updating if they change processes or they move hazmat to different areas of the building and how much they have.
Do you have to notify somebody if you mark their property as a dangerous location?
I don't think so. It's more of an awareness for us, yeah.
Some guy out there that doesn't know that his house is a dangerous location.
Right. And that form goes to Major Cooper eventually, and then he submits it to MetroSafe. So
I've been emailing them to Cooper directly.
yeah.
I have a form saved and I just type it up.
He's got somebody at MetroSafe that puts them into the CAD, and then we'll take the form and attach it into Active 911 and put those same notes
Have
in.
they given any thought to, I know it's technology, so probably not, but the target hazard, so I did like Clarion Chemical last year and I had like 200 pages of stuff, all color-coded charts of their chemicals and all that stuff. And I think I called someone at Fire Prevention, I was like, why does it make sense for me to print off this target hazard, for you to scan it in a black and white offset so it looks like crap when you pull it up, versus I can put this somewhere, email it, I couldn't email it, it's too big, but I could put it in a file and then you could upload that file to the thing, so it'd be all color-coded and have color-coded pictures and all that stuff, and they're like,
Yeah.
it blew their mind. So I don't know if
I
there's any
guess if
thought
it
to
was something like that, it would be easier than scanning it.
Yeah, because when you pull them up on a run, they're scanned and they're like offset and they're black and white and they're
Yeah.
blurry. So there's something where you could upload it to a certain place and put,
Really, after they're scanning it, they're putting it in the H drive target hazards folder. I guess the only thing you're not getting is the sign-off sheet. Goes through, but
Change it. We've been doing it like that for 100 years.
well,
I'm even gonna see it in
I guess worst case, you could just turn it in as usual, but then also put those on the H drive folder. Just say, hey, because we can attach those in. The only problem is Active 911 has a file size limit, so we've got some that are huge and have like really detailed floor plans that won't attach because they're too big.
I've seen where it has several different ones you have to open.
Yeah.
Is that why that is?
Yeah. Mhm. I can't remember what the file size limit is, but it's not a lot.
Should get an extra check. Should get an extra check.
These next two, fee schedules and fines. The only one we really have a fee for is hazmat permits. And that fee is based on the maximum amount that they have of whatever, whether it's a liquid or gas, they put what the maximum amount, what it is, and then that determines what their fee level is. We've got like a level 1, 2, and 3. And then also, if you all install a smoke alarm in a rental property and mark that it's a rental, Donna and Karen sent a letter to them basically saying, trying to recoup this $25 cost of installing a smoke alarm. Because the ordinance says that the owner or the landlord is responsible for installing those.
I have a question in that. You know, we have a lot of renters. I'll go into a basement and there's kids sleeping on the floor, and you know, there's 8 people down there, and I can't in good conscience walk out of there without, and they don't have a smoke detector. I can't, I'll tell your landlord. So how do you guys
I would put one up.
Okay. I mean, I can't leave and just let them.
We try, like, we don't go after them in court or anything and get that $25, but we send them a letter and at least 90% send us a check.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But we don't want to leave them unprotected.
Yeah, that's, I can't walk away if
So
it's
just
like
put
that.
one up and we'll deal with it. And if it's like an apartment building, we get them sometimes a metro call where they say, I called my landlord and they won't come out and put one up. So we'll send that out to you all so we get one installed, and then we'll have an inspector still follow up with the landlord and basically educate them. This is what the ordinance says. This is your responsibility. We also have a form that we're using now for, we're not going to get into every apartment unit. So if we go to do an 8-plex even, we're not going to get into every unit to check that they've got good windows, smoke alarms. So they basically fill out this form saying they're confirming that they have working smoke alarms in every unit, working window or openable windows, and door closers. Because we found that to be an issue. We've had fatal fires in the past few years where door was left open, and that was part of the cause of people not being able to get out.
Chopped open door.
Yeah. Good example, the fatal fire on Village a couple years ago. I think it ended up the front and rear stairwells, the first floor doors were opened and left open, didn't have closers. And we had fire in both stairwells, and we've got pictures where the outside of the door is completely charred, and then the inside of the apartment, it looks like there's 0 damage. So that's been a big push and we're getting pushback on some too, where apartment owners are not wanting to install these closers, and it's trying to educate, hey, this is a very little cost for making sure that people can still get out, because that's their primary and maybe their secondary way out of their apartment unit. If you live on the 2nd or 3rd floor or higher, you gotta have that stair to get out, otherwise you're jumping out a window. And it takes the human element out, because that's been a big push, is like close the door behind you and that sort of thing. And if somebody's leaving their house or their apartment unit, they're not thinking about that. So to take that human element out, and it's just shutting behind you. Fines for us don't really come into play until the court process. It might be lumped into, say, well, we'll put jail time and a fine on the shelf. And if you're not compliant for the next 12 or 24 months, that's what they get. Legal fees along with that process.
Do we ever attempt to do like what the police did? Like if the police make a false burglar alarm? I I don't know what the defined number of times.
Nuisance runs.
Yeah, let's just
Yeah.
say 3 times in a 24-hour period, they get, do we have anything like that, or are we
We
attempting to
don't,
implement it?
we've got basically handouts that are false alarm reduction, but we don't have an ordinance that allows us to cite for that. It's always a possibility, but a lot of times it'll be like one building that we're having a problem with, and then we follow up and figure out it's an alarm issue or whatever, and working with their alarm company or whoever it is to get them to fix it. The AHJ, so when we're inspecting a building out of the fire code, we're the AHJ. If the building's under construction, the building department is the AHJ, and we're more of an advisory role. Let's see, enforcement can be contentious. Yeah, it can be. It can get political. If people have connections or think they have connections, sometimes they just push back and then they say, well, I'm gonna call so-and-so, and but as long as we can explain that why we're citing it, educate them and why it's important, usually smooths that out. And sometimes people don't want to let us in at all and want us there, and most people don't want us there because we're either saying you need to fix something or cost them some money.
So can you not enter if they say I don't want you in here?
Nope. We have to get an administrative search warrant if they do not give us permission.
Does that happen very often?
It hasn't happened in a while. Now it's gonna happen. In that case, we get an administrative warrant, and then we go out there with arson and just do an inspection. And most of the time it's because they're hiding something they're not supposed to. Coordinating the team, that's having communication with those outside agencies that we talked about. Being involved in the construction process and maintaining those relationships. Water department too, we have a relationship with the water department. If you all ever see an issue with water supply or hydrants out in the field, send it in to us, because we can find an area. We found a neighborhood that should have had hydrants and didn't, and we found like the closest hydrant was like 1,200 feet away. So we basically proposed to the water company, as budget and time allow, we would like extension of hydrants into this neighborhood, and they have done it in the past. So if you all see, I think one came up yesterday. Some hydrants where the building is set back pretty far from the road, and they're thinking it was maybe 1,000 feet to the closest hydrant. Going back to right of entry, the inspection authority. So the code gives us that authority, and so does the Kentucky Standards of Safety. And extreme instances where somebody says, no, you can't come in, administrative warrant. Documentation. Basically everything that we can get on the place, we really want in our files, and that's something we pride ourselves on, is having good files. Other city departments will come to us and ask what we have on a building, because we've got paper files that go back to the 60s. We try to capture as much as we can in image trend, whether that's floor plans or a new building was built, we'll attach the CO in there, their initial building plans. All of our inspection records are in there. Where it gets complicated is when you change to a new system. So we were with paper, then we moved to Firehouse, and now we've got image trend. So an open records request comes in on a building, we're having to look 3 different places. Figure out a little bit of that history. And that's where, when we were talking about notes on even just a home inspection, having something there that if somebody says, we want to know every time the fire department was in this building, if it just says home inspection smoke detector install, they might ask, well, where did they put it? When was this? And so just having some sort of note for our activity.
It's not red, but you ever know your, I always put notes.
Yeah, it's not a required field in there.
Just like a pre-normal inspection.
If I do a smoke detector test, I'll put like,
Scheduling visits, our inspectors try to schedule most of their inspections. Brittany will send out a monthly list of all the stuff that's due that month. It's most of our annual inspections.
do that thing.
We typically don't show up to a restaurant at lunch rush and say, hey, we're here to do an inspection. Most of that stuff is scheduled, but if it's an apartment building or just a business, we'll stop by and say, hey, do you have time? All 3 of our captains handle reviewing all the inspection reports that come in, so inspectors do their inspections and they'll review all that and make sure that we've got everything that we need documented in the file. Again, inspectors explaining dangers of whatever conditions they find. Citing examples of how not complying or not fixing it might lead to a fire, or how it's going to make their people safer. Go ahead.
How long does like a normal inspection of like, say, a restaurant versus a high-rise take you guys? Like, you know, like how long are you on site?
It definitely varies. It's like a high rise. I mean, you might look, that's why we don't, it's impossible to put quotas on inspectors, because if you say, well, you need to do 10 in a day, if you're in Engine 5's district and all you're doing is high rises, you might get 1 a day. NFPA has come up with some guidelines on how to figure out what you need as adequate staffing for a bureau. And they've got estimates on number of hours, including like the documentation and paperwork for different occupancy types. So a high rise might be, I don't know, 5 or 6, but just a normal office or whatever, or a 4-plex apartment building might be 1. So yeah, it really depends. I know you all might not agree that less frequent fires are a good thing. But I guess that's the overall goal. Less fires, smaller fires, providing more information to you all that you can know ahead of time before it's actually on fire. Fire safety checklists used by companies. We don't really have one, but we've got plenty of like tip sheets that you all can use that we've got down at headquarters. We started kind of moving to tear-off sheets, so it's easier to keep in the rig or whatever, and you can just tear one off and give it to a homeowner. We've got some for home fire safety, multifamily fire safety, public assemblies. Political positions. A lot of this comes into play with new construction. Sometimes we get pushback on requirements, especially with things costing more now. Developers are trying to cut costs. And sometimes that ends up being safety issues. So we have to just push for what we know is required, and a big help in that is that we're pretty heavily involved in the new construction process. We've got one plan reviewer and two new construction field inspectors. So that plan reviewer is involved with the building department from the very beginning. He's doing a review in addition to the building plan reviewer. And then once those plans are approved, our field inspectors are making sure that it's built according to those plans. And any other issues that come up before it's actually done, because we found buildings even recently where they're putting the wrong Siamese on there, the wrong threads. So they're checking that, so when it's actually done, it's right. And just a note on that too, if you all see anything that's being built, Captain Savoy is our new construction captain. Give him a call and they can give you any information you need. I know you all have taken advantage of that too. We've got a lot of podium construction going up where unless you see it when it's being built and you can go through there, you might not know what type of construction it is.
Does that include like U of L's campus, or are they exempt because they're college?
U of L has its own fire marshal, that's Mike Long right now, but he's very open to us doing walkthroughs. So he's been pretty clear that if you want to walk through anything that's going in out there, let him know. I've got his contact if you need it. This is just a little bit about the indirect cost when a business burns. It might be loss of tax revenue. They're losing payroll for their employees. You put a cost on losing human life, and that business might shut down or so fire prevention program, we're trying to keep that from happening too. That's been something that a lot of large departments are looking at, is not just the contents and the property loss that we're estimating based on PVA, which might not be accurate, but actually looking at the total indirect cost of that business not being in operation. One of the hardest things to do is to find the actual cost of a loss, because we're turning in an estimate and NFPA uses that number, but it might be way higher than that, what the insurance company actually pays out to that homeowner or business owner. Life safety issues, that's the main goal of code enforcement, is to protect the building's occupants, make sure they've got the proper fire protection systems, that they're working, adequate egress. Again, most departments don't inspect single family or duplexes. We do not. Also for state-owned properties, state licensed properties, JCPS, hospitals, that sort of thing, State Fire Marshal's Office has jurisdiction through AHJ on that. We don't typically use these, but some departments use a letter of concern. That's basically just here's our recommendations, what we found on an inspection, and what they should do to correct it. Written notice of violation, this is where we start. We've got a normal violation letter, a liability letter, and a legal letter. And if they haven't fixed violations after that, we can take out an administrative warrant. Imminent hazards, this is more like we find a warehouse that's being used as a nightclub. Exits are totally messed up, people can't get out. So it might be where we're trying to vacate people out of that building. And also part of that are the vacants like we talked about. So if it needs to be boarded, I think it's just us and police that can submit an emergency boarding request. And then same with the demo, an emergency demo evaluation request. Notice a hazard also comes in here because their system's down. So the wording on there basically tells them you have to have a fire watch or vacate the building. And then we'll go up and follow up on that, make sure if it's still not repaired that they've still got a fire watch in place, and follow up on what they're doing to fix it. Does everybody have the newer form that has a line where you can put a description of the problem, like broken pipe or something like that? There's a newer version out there that we've got down at headquarters if you need them. And then property rep, if you can get it, is helpful too, because we were talking the other day about, I think it was Christmas Day. Was it a really bad day for pipes bursting?
Christmas Eve and Christmas
We got a
Day.
huge stack. And basically at that point, we're just assigning them out to inspectors and they're making phone calls. Because it's a waste of time to go out there just to figure out they haven't fixed it yet, because the sprinkler companies were so backlogged with all those repairs that it was taking some time. So they're following up on the phone, and so it's good to have that contact information at least, so a little bit less hunting down for the property rep.
Situations like that, what if there's nobody there? Like if it's some kind of warehouse setting or commercial setting or just an apartment building. Like for example, I think it's 201 or 209 York, I'm not sure which one it is. But you would have an issue on something and there was...
Is that Hampton Hall?
Yeah, that sounds right, yeah. An exact example was that it appeared that the maintenance man had fixed the pull station in the basement because it was coming off the wall. It looked like it actually had like drywall screws in there holding it. Or all it would take was a bump of somebody coming out of the laundry room, bumping that thing, getting on the elevator, and it would activate.
Yeah.
But there was never anybody there. The system wouldn't reset because it thought that that pull station had been pulled. There was no way for us to take it apart and fix it. But to issue a notice of hazard was issuing a notice of hazard to nobody.
Yeah.
There wasn't even a property rep that was even over there, a manager. You'd ask people, can you get a hold of your manager? No, I don't even know how. Or on the pipes bursting over the single degree temperatures we had, there were a lot of buildings you'd go to that there wasn't anybody to give a notice of hazard to.
Yeah.
You had to shut down a system and reset. I know
It's the
what we
only thing-
do, but what's like the official answer on what we're supposed to do?
I guess the only thing you could do is somehow post it, and then as long as it's still coming to us, then we're following up and trying to find the property owner.
So even if there's no, we submit it to you, so you know what the
Yeah.
issue is, but I think that Hampton Hall, I think it's a perfect example. I think on in the little office, mailroom office there's a board with like a nail where several of them are stuck to that. Where it's like I'm telling somebody that because this system won't reset for this or that or whatever, that there's an official fire watch going on, but there's nobody to do it other than maybe telling some tenants like, hey, we isolated the 4th floor valve because you were hanging clothes on your sprinkler pipe and pulled it,
Yeah.
loosened it up or whatever.
Mhm.
So we can't stay there indefinitely waiting for
Right.
this phantom maintenance man that's never gonna show up.
Yeah.
And then also, in saying that, what if somebody does show up that's a property rep, whether it be maintenance or security or whatever, and you explain to them what's on that form, and they say, oh, I ain't signing that.
I guess they don't technically need to sign it, as long as you're giving them that and maybe making a note, used to sign. So I think they've changed it now. The wording is if the system's out of service for 10 hours or more in a 24-hour period. It used to be 4 hours. So technically you're leaving the system's down right now. We don't know if it's been down for 10 hours or if it's going to be down for 10 hours. At least they have that notice, and then we go in and follow up. We talked about maybe making that form electronic to make it a little bit easier. Maybe you
Make
fill
it
it out on the
instantaneous.
iPad, get them to sign there. They get an email of it, we get an email. So instead of waiting for that to come through the district mail, we get an automatic notification that, hey, we've got to go check on this one.
So when we do
That sounds like a really good idea.
when we do that, we make it box alarms, you know, from that point on. Like how do they terminate that? Like I know I've done it at Dosco a few times and
Yeah.
left. It's like, it's on box alarms only right now because either the elevator's down or, something like that. How do you?
Usually if we get notification that like elevators are down for this high rise or whatever, I send that to the car fives. And then they talk to Metro Safe. So it's really us following up with car fives and saying, hey, they fixed the elevators.
Seems like we never get sent anything back. We just make a
Yeah.
still alarm.
I think we've got that on Mayflower right now, I think. No, it's actually Hampton Hall, I think. I think their elevators down.
Probably be box alarms only. all
That
the
should be an
time.
emergency demolition, but that's a whole different story.
Both those buildings sitting there should be box alarms only.
Every time, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the most recent one, is Hampton Hall. I think they fixed the elevator at Mayflower, maybe.
Yeah, that was like a long process, but they fixed it, but it still doesn't work, because they have that one maintenance one in the back.
Yeah.
Freight elevator
Well,
that,
they were trying to take everybody up that for a while.
yeah. And you got the dope head that runs it that shakes the thing real quick, so it'll stop between floors and stuff.
Overrides it, yeah, yeah.
I think, if it was a Mayflower or Hampton Hall, we've got a new system now that sprinkler and fire alarm contractors have to submit their reports electronically. So we're getting these reports a lot sooner than we normally would have. Normally, we don't see them until we go out to do our inspection. We got one in that was like 3 floors, the sprinkler system was shut down. We were like, what's going on here? And it ended up, people are stealing parts and stuff off the sprinkler system. So they had to shut it down. But it's like, who shut it down and why didn't you tell anybody about it? Yeah, that goes into Firewatch. Because you know what that means. Making sure they have people to do a fire watch. And that's something that we're following up on if we get a notice of hazard in, that they understand what a fire watch is if it's out for an extended period of time. Stop work orders, we don't really deal with that. It's more on the building department. If we do find a building that's doing work without a permit, we'll refer to them and they can put a stop work order on it. We don't really issue fire prevention permits. Some departments have a permit for everything. Oh, you have a public assembly, you need a permit. So sometimes they couple that with violations. Well, you've got all these violations, we're gonna revoke your permit, you can't occupy it until you fix this.
So like, when they do those like, I remember Hometown Rising, or whatever the big concert was they did at the fairgrounds, someone said like, the reason that the fire department goes there now is because fire prevention went there and said that it's so many people cooking and all that stuff, so we gotta have an engine company or whatever here. Is that true, or is that like a?
No. I think we've just typically done that for the large festivals, really. Talking about Thunder, and then they added Bourbon and Beyond and Louder Than Life and Hometown Rising. And what's the other one on the waterfront? front.
That's for,
Forecastle. We do get special event permits in for large events and even small events, and so that gets assigned to basically every agency has anything to do with it, EMS, police, fire, so I'll look at those and put an approval on it. If it's something that has road closures or it's a big event, they go on a calendar and they should show up on the LFTN screen. So if you've got an event coming up, it'll have what dates that road's closed. They're estimating 50,000 people or whatever. And then same for fireworks and pyro permits. Those go in through special events. They go to Andy, our hazmat guy, and then they go to me, and then they go to Colonel Muir, and then they go to the chief. And he signs off on that. And then they get a permit to have pyro in a building, as long as it's fully sprinkled and meets all the requirements. And then we'll have local fire inspectors out there. Court orders, again, they'll basically say, hey, you've got 6 months jail time on the shelf if you don't have continued compliance or fine. Which doesn't happen that often, but we do have some, usually a couple that are actively in court. It's just a long process. We'd rather get it fixed before it gets to the court process, but sometimes it goes that way. Maintaining good attitude and demeanor. Really, it goes a long way for that side of things, inspections, whether it's a home inspection or but
you're getting headbutt you for that.
it's all in the way you say it. Tell somebody, hey, this is wrong. Some of the complex inspections, I might get involved. Inspection scheduling, talked about how Brittany does that. We try and schedule things. In new construction process, we'll witness some of the fire protection tests, like they'll do like a hood system dump. I think we've got a good one coming up soon, that UPS hangar out at the airport's got the foam system, and they're gonna do a full foam dump on that.
The giant one they're building?
Yeah.
And what is that gonna be?
I don't know yet.
Maintenance? It's an incredible structure.
That's huge.
Yeah.
We can reach the back of it with our trucks, but not the front. Did you go out there, Mike, on the?
I didn't,
Okay.
I must not have been there.
Do you all meet companies out when they do like inspections on the standpipes and stuff like that on buildings? Do you all know when they're doing those inspections? I always thought it'd be kind of interesting to meet, as an engine company downtown on a high rise, when they do the inspection and when they kind of tag along and see what,
Yeah, it would be good to see. They're not required to tell us when they're doing it.
Is it an annual, do you know that, on most of those buildings?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So talking about that, like, I remember when they built the Omni, I happened to be down there one day when we did the walkthrough where they were building the standpipe. Our SOP says you flow this plus 5 per floor, and the engineer who did the fire pumps and all that stuff is like, whatever you do not pump more than 180 pounds into this standpipe connection. And there's even a placard on it that says, do not pump 180 pounds on there.
Yeah.
And we told him about our SOP. He's like, I don't care, do not pump. Plus 5 per floor. He's like,
I can't remember what their system, how it's designed. I know they have pressure reducing valves on
yeah.
the floor.
They got a pump too, so I mean, it's,
Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember it had a placard that says, do not pump more than, which
I don't know if that number's accurate, what you're saying, 180.
I can't remember what it was, but it was.
Yeah, I
it
think it's
wasn't
much,
what I was-
I think what you're gonna have to, you always got head pressure, that you gotta. Yeah, I think, and there's different ones in that building too, for different floors. It's kind of a confusing building. You don't really know what you're pumping into.
That was one in new construction phase. We found that the connections were, a bunch of floors were turned where you couldn't even get a hose line connected to it.
You mean, what, the standpipe?
Yeah. Yeah. And we had to have them go and turn all of them.
That's interesting.
It's just some of the things that they don't really think about. You'd hope that a sprinkler installer
They're there.
would know about that. Again, plan review process, we're involved from the beginning. At least we're lucky enough to be. Really in the county, they're just getting a notification that there's a new permit. So it's really up to them to reach out to the building inspector and trying to get it a little bit more to where the building inspectors are reaching out to them, at least before they do a final, get some input. Appeals process, really they're having to go through the state fire marshal's office if they're appealing a violation. And we talked about this, mitigating fire ground risks, really with pre-planning and prioritizing firefighter safety with all the information that we're able to get, whether it's on an existing inspection or a new construction process. And that includes floor plans, whatever we can get on there. ISO, we had our ISO review not too long ago. And I don't think we've gotten our updated score, but we didn't expect it to change from a class 1. But they even take into account inspection program, public education, and every piece, water supply, suppression, they all get points, all those different sections. And they come in town and basically they're here for a week and they interview people to basically make sure that you're actually doing what you say you're doing. Evaluating the program, this is basically tracking data. Number of fire incidents, where are they happening? Fire fatalities, do we have preventable injuries and fatalities? We're trying to do a little bit more like after the fire and figure out, are there human factors in the cause of that fire? What are our top causes of fire? Do we have fires that are controlled by the sprinkler system, that have a sprinkler system and it didn't work for some reason? So just kind of digging on that data. Yeah, that's what we're doing with that data. Trying to identify problems and find a way to fix it. And I think that's about it for chapter 10. You guys have anything? I underestimated a little bit.
Oh, that's all right.
This question may be, you might not have an answer to it, but let's say, so there's a Kroger if there's a Kroger in the city, then that has to be inspected by you all. But at what point, like if they put a fireworks tent out on their property, in their parking lot, that's a separate, you have to go in and inspect that? Like, is that like, I'm just thinking of things like you do normally, this building, you gotta do this subway and this strip mall and everything.
So
Every time this time of year when they throw a fireworks tent out there, is that inspectable
They're
also?
supposed to be, have a state permit for a fireworks tent. Andy Smith, our hazmat inspector, he'll reach out to the state every year before July and get that list of permitted tents, so he knows what's out there that's supposed to be there. And then he'll stop by and do like the fire safety inspection and also look for the stuff that's not legal in Jefferson County. And that's by ordinance. So if he finds any of that, we'll send that to arson and they usually go by and look for it and they'll confiscate it.
So fireworks fall under kind of more of a hazmat.
Come off and bring it to the firehouse.
So what if inside the Kroger store, they have a huge display with all kind of fireworks? They're not gonna be the illegal ones, but does that change anything? Do they have to do anything for that? Or can Kroger sell basically?
No, because I think it's based on the classification of the fireworks and their consumer fireworks and the quantities. But there's requirements that they've got the tent and the ordinance outlines everything they can't have. It can't go up in the air and explode. That's really basic, but they've got different types in there that you can have that are considered consumer fireworks and can't have.
It's almost that time of year.
You live in Bullock County, it doesn't matter, they're everywhere.
A week. Doesn't matter what time of year it is, there's fireworks going up in the air.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I thought they were doing minimum standards. It's only 11. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Hopefully they ought to be done by now. Semi apparatus and everybody can tell what they were doing.